All right, got me on there. So thanks for the opportunity. Reason I was invited to speak to this topic is that I spent 21 years in IT within Microsoft. So I've really experienced the rubber hits the road moments relative to our own technologies. So with that, I'd like to share some of those experiences with you today, relative specifically to Lync. So within the time I spent in Microsoft, the first 10 years of my career was managing the help desk. So I got that frontline support across the board, experienced what it was to have to deal with the customer service directly, and then transitioned to Exchange as Microsoft did the Exchange deployments and then adopted the Lync services and telephony overall. Within that time, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges that we had within Microsoft, hopefully give you guys a little bit of a heads up. If you haven't deployed yet, for others, I should see some head nodding relative to some of the challenges, and then talk about some of the solutions that we deployed there to address them. Before I really talk about the negatives associated with it, I'll talk about the positives with Lync. Within Microsoft, through 2014, I left Microsoft a year ago for Unify Square to continue my own focus with the Lync service journey. But in 2014, the deployment within Microsoft was quite broad. We had Lync deployed in 3 data centers globally, 93,000 users enabled for enterprise voice at 88 sites. Which covered the majority of the employees in the company. So even though I'm going to bring up some of the challenges associated with that, it is very possible, very pragmatic, and successful to have a deployment at that scale and scope. Within the company, I heard there was earlier conversation about video in the enterprise. As an example, I'm a fan of video. Enabling for enhanced collaboration, it's one of the great opportunities. So I'd like to share some numbers. Within the company, we actually had 800 independent VTC, video teleconference devices deployed globally. For those devices, it was an exciting month if they were used 5 times. So in a monthly period, somebody would come in, activate the device, connect it up, and start a collaboration session. With enterprise voice, once we started getting the Lync platform deployed more completely across the company in a ubiquitous manner, video itself was adopted to the tune of about 80,000 sessions a month. And those are peer-to-peer sessions. Those could be group sessions where video's only shared from a conference room out to the remote attendees, or customer sessions where a salesperson is actually using it to be more personable outward to their customer. But we saw great success in that regard as well. Another number that I like to share is relative to planning for Lync, is that we looked at the conferencing numbers before we did our enterprise or our conferencing deployment. And from the time we started the conferencing minutes of a couple of million minutes a month to enterprise voice deployment with Lync on conferencing, we saw a 60% increase in those minutes of active use. We saw that as uncapped potential because it is an enabling technology from a paradigm that your users get to use it wherever they are, but also the way that they want to do it. They start from an IM communication, they then escalate that to an independent communication, collaboration, and then start pulling in more individuals, and it just becomes a natural experience. But it's also one of the challenges I'll bring up today that when we plan these site deployments and the data center deployments that we had there, the reality is we didn't expect that kind of growth. And that compounded year after year at roughly that 60% for 3 years in a row because there was just this untapped potential of collaboration around the paradigm of UC once users got the taste of it. The adoption cycle within Microsoft wasn't a lot different than I hear from a lot of customers. We started with the basic design within Microsoft. The challenge there was that we had already had a VoIP deployment. We had gateways installed at many countries and many sites, so we thought we were pretty well prepared for that activity. It's just a transition to another platform. We had a situation where we expected to integrate and keep past short dial capability with the enterprise voice platform. And as a result of that, we built an architectural design that tried to keep everything moving forward that we had as an installation. And that really became problematic for us. When we looked at that, not only did we not meet the scale that was expected, the demand for the service that came along for us, we also tried to drag forward our past experiences versus go talk to the vendors, meet with folks who were doing the Lync-specific deployments that would make us successful at that time. So we actually ended up having to do a lot of rework. The other aspect of it is that we were so focused on getting it out to the users that we didn't do much in the way of planning around PBX retirement. We installed Lync and alongside the PBXs, integrated with the PBXs, and I'll have to say, to this day, the majority of those PBXs are still installed. The reality of the deployment is that most of the cost savings came in early in the project, especially with audio conferencing deployments. We saved so much on a per minute cost and charge that was really taken back as part of the budgeting cycle. I'm sure we've all had the experiences where budgets come around, IT is supposed to get some level of more efficient, and that give back basically took a lot of the steam out of our ability to transition those savings into that PBX retirement activity. So it's a point of caution that I experienced internally I wanted to share here today. But outside of the architectural design, scaling issues that we addressed, we did do IM and presence at first. The adoption of that was fine. We had no issues of performance or user support issues. Then we started doing the conferencing activity. And it's typical for customers to do what we did internally, broad conferencing release, almost no active adoption of it because we did it in parallel with the previous option that existed out there. We said, great, you've got the dial-in conferencing you're familiar with, and you've got this new click-to-join and fully enabled UC environment, and nobody used it. We were at counts that were abysmal for the first quarter, and we'd send out the email reminders, we'd send out the push. Then we turned around and said, we've got to start taking away the other option. And that's when things started to explode. So we did shift from a together strategy where we attempted to give a soft transition to it. That was quite ineffective, and then we forced it out upon the user community. We began our voice deployments at that time, and that's where we really discovered our architectural issues. We didn't have enough operational excellence around managing the experience, so we weren't seeing the call drops users experienced. We weren't seeing the issues that they faced on a daily basis utilizing the system. So I'll talk a little bit more of that as we get further here. The challenges hit us because Lync was far more complex than we were prepared operationally to handle. That complexity came around the forms that my team was responsible for operating Lync. If it ran Lync code, we were operating it and managing it. The truth is, it ran. It did exactly what was expected. That didn't mean necessarily the network was prepared. That didn't necessarily mean that the users' PCs were up to snuff if they were going to do that connectivity from those devices, that we had chosen all the right devices for the user community through our adoption process. So we had underestimated what it really took to enable UC under a new transformative paradigm. The lifestyle changes hit us. Within Microsoft, within that first year period, we did a measurement of where our users were, and over 50% of all of our conference joins and calls were made off our corporate network. We had invested, of course, heavily in QoS, making sure that we had the appropriate deployment of prioritization on our network. But with so many folks outside of the network, we had underestimated the impact that was going to have on overall voice quality. The user ultimately gave us a fail. When we checked in with them, we had levels of revolt relative to the experience. Around conferencing, that happened pretty early on, because if you look at a situation where, let's say that you have an average of 4 people join a conference, it only takes one individual to actually cause that conference to become problematic. And that really impeded our business success. So we took a step back from it, and then we looked at taking a 3 KPI approach. We embraced what was it that was happening around Lync availability. My team and I would show up for monthly service reviews with the CIO and basically express that Lync is green. If I look at server availability for Lync, we had a fabulous month, we had a fabulous quarter, but his experiences were not complementary to that. When I looked at all of my peers, the network team were saying they were green, the telephony team were saying their components were all green, but end to end, the experience that the users were having were that, they'd have to click 2 or 3 times to join a conference. That they would often dial and get a fast busy, and we weren't seeing the real end-to-end service availability. So we had to step back away from that and start thinking about availability differently. We turned our focus away from system-specific availability, measuring those individual components, to really a synthetics-based capability. And it kind of dawned on us, and it was kind of funny because we have those type of capabilities around web services. We have tests that go against our Microsoft.com to make sure it's up and operational and responsive. You're looking for that sub 2-second response time for any website. We weren't doing that for the voice loads. So we went out and started engaging partners. We tried to build our own tool to do synthetic-based monitoring, try to do a connect of a conference call, but we messed up again and did that within the company. Majority of the problems that we actually experienced were people remotely, working from home or federated from other customers that were attempting to join. So we had to go look for solutions that were more dynamic, that had the external in capability to monitor our system. Once we found that, we were able to identify not only hard down situations, we were able to see intermittent situations where we would meet with the networking team and they would say, our tools don't show that we have a systemic problem. But end to end, we were able to measure with that synthetic monitoring the true experience an end user was receiving, how often they were getting those click to join failures remotely. And we would find things like our DMZs were over capacity. We found certain situations where DNS was misrouting. We found many issues within the architecture that ultimately weren't actually Lync at its core. The team that I was managing wasn't trained going in to address all those issues, but were ultimately accountable for it. So once we solved that, we looked at voice quality aspects of the service as an additional KPI. Again, looking at our internal adoption, we had solid quals deployed across the environment, but we also had the exposure of scope creep over time. As the networking team did their first deployment, we found that when they go and do rework, they deploy additional set of code or updates to the infrastructure, that quals wouldn't continuously be reset to work appropriately. So we not only had an assumption that it was once in, one and done, that that was a misperception, and we had to have levels of accountability. So we engaged third parties to look at the voice quality management at a deeper level and on a continuous level so that we could monitor that on a more active basis. More importantly, we had to extend that view to the realities of Lync. What was happening when people were joining from home? What was happening when they made their choice of using Wi-Fi versus wired to conduct core business? And we had to get tools that matured our telemetry. The out-of-the-box tools gave us a very basic and told us we were failing. It told us our overall call percentage was poor, but it didn't give us the finite data necessary. So we went looking for solutions that allowed us to dig deeply into voice quality and start really addressing that. We, of course, started with how things were happening inside the corporate data network, but real quickly realized it was about managing the user's experience outside of that data network. Once we had a handle on that, we moved to user satisfaction. We were still measuring we measured on a 6-month basis, do a basic IT survey. What do you think about our services? And those general responses were negative. We fell below Exchange on an average of about 40 points on a 200-point scale. So we had to figure out, well, what's going on within these surveys? So we employed and went out looking for a solution that would allow us to start pinging our users, investigating on a more automated basis, an effective basis, to gather the statistics about what the user was experiencing and let us know what was really happening for them. it surprised us at time and again that we would look at our call statistics at the help desk and they just wouldn't call. And if you actually think about your experience with conferencing, what's the chance that if you have a bad conference experience, you're with your customer, you're trying to connect, and it goes bad, do you jump on the call with the help desk? No, it's too late. You're in the active monitoring and active management at that point. You're basically trying to repair that situation. So we stopped waiting for them to call the help desk and started becoming more active. So I've already talked a little bit about the monitoring, kind of why things fell short, was because the users were telling us when we went out and active that their calls are failing. Our active system monitoring was not telling us that. So we went to the synthetics approach, which we didn't stop doing server monitoring. We just augmented with this synthetics-based end-to-end experience. That allowed us to do simulations of calls from users in Sydney to the US, Sydney's joining conferences in other areas, Auckland to China, whatever those happen to be, all from the outside into our environment, allowing us to simulate what the user was experiencing, allowing us to understand and then act upon the reality of our situation. Once we connected with the end users, we were able to get more proactive on their experiences. The example experiences within Microsoft were that we had a specific office that was our key technology center and our top engineering, kind of the data scientists, PhDs that do pure research. We had made the decision when we did the first deployment there that the right devices to deploy to these folks was to put phones on their desktop. But we were going to be advanced in that deployment, and we said, well, we'll give them headsets too. Well, little did we know that that experience basically meant if they picked up their handset, that they're going to get audio only during a call. They're not going to be able to get voice, and unless they plug that phone into the PC, which didn't happen. People didn't use that USB connector. They weren't able to actually share data actively in that session. So it created this disjointed experience that we had no telemetry on, no measurement on, that we ultimately had to ask them about. And then we actually went in, pulled all those phones out, trained them on those headset use, and then we saw that 40-point gap close with that specific customer deployment. In another situation, we found that we had deployed to a site and spent all of our time focused, of course, if you're inside Microsoft, on Windows. Within that paradigm, we missed the fact that we had an entire office depending on Macintoshes, and they weren't receiving QoS in that situation. We were getting data on call quality issues in aggregate, but when you're doing millions of calls at that kind of volume, it's noise at that level. By doing the 3 KPI approach, being able to come in, say, hey, what's the user availability from the synthetics perspective, but also asking them what their opinions are, we were able to find those gaps, turn real negatives into positives, and then manage the experience in a more full way. As a result of looking at this holistically, I was able to go to the future CIO service reviews, and instead of walking in with a set of measures that basically look like a watermelon, green on the outside, but as soon as you slice into it was nothing but red inside, we were able to tell the real story. We were able to help hold ourselves accountable for the reality of the user experience as it was being delivered to our end users versus what our typical telemetry would tell us simply looking at systems and service management.